Hello and welcome to Verbal to Visual. My name is Doug Neill, and today I would like to share with you my plan for studying Spanish in preparation for a 10-day trip to Mexico that I'm taking in a couple of months. Let's get into it. So the main thing that I would like to explore in this video is how I'm using sketchnoting, also known as visual note-taking, to help me brush up on my Spanish skills. And let me start by sharing the two main sources of Spanish that I'm digging into as I work on deepening my Spanish language skills. The first source is one that I access online, and it's actually the YouTube channel of a news station based in Mexico. And there I've been doing a combination of watching the live stream of the news that's coming out right in that moment, and also looking back through recent clips to take a look at some that seem most interesting to me. And in this case, what I feel like is adding some motivation to my studying is the fact that I have this trip planned. I know that I'm going to Mexico in about a month and a half, so that's providing me with some motivation to stick with my language learning. And having that location identified makes it fun because then I can weave in language learning material from that specific place. So in addition to developing language skills that are specific to that area, I'm also getting a flavor for what's going on there right now. I had similar reasoning in mind as I picked this second source of Spanish language that I'm digging into, and that's a book written in Spanish by a Mexican author. In this case, that author is Octavio Paz, and the book is The Labyrinth of Solitude. And in this case, this source is less about what's going on in Mexico right now, and more about its history, explored through the lens of this single person. And so far, at least, I'm really enjoying that combination. Now, I feel like it's worth pointing out here that the sources that I'm choosing to explore are connected to the fact that I'm just brushing up on my Spanish skills, because I actually spent a year of my college experience living in Ecuador, where I slowly became pretty proficient in Spanish. And that's why it doesn't feel too daunting to watch live news coverage or dig into a fairly intellectual book. If I were studying a language that I'm much less familiar with, French, for example, I'd be selecting sources of French that are much more approachable. And likely sometime in the future, I'll share what that looks like whenever I get a trip to France on the books. But even in this case, as I'm watching the news from Mexico and reading this book, there are plenty of words that come up that I don't know. And while I'm watching or reading, I'm actively listening for and underlining those words that I just don't know right now. And this is where the sketchnoting comes in. I've been using simple index cards as my primary study tool with a two-sided approach. On one side of the index card, I simply write out the new word in Spanish. And on the flip side, I draw a line down the middle to split the card in half. And within that section on the left, I sketch out some visual connected to the definition of that word that I've now looked up. And then on the right side, I just write out the translation, that word in English. Let me show you a handful of examples of how that's been looking so far. What I like about this kind of three-pronged approach here is that gives me lots of different ways to study. I can just look at the word in Spanish and see if I can recall the translation, or I can start on the flip side, cover up the right side of it, just look at the sketch and see if I can remember the Spanish word connected to that sketch, or I could cover up the left side and just look at the word in English and see if that's enough to trigger the word in Spanish. And whenever possible here, I've been including the source sentence on the front of that index card below the boldly written word in Spanish, just because I find that that's really helpful for me to see that word in context. And oftentimes I can remember the particular news story or what was being explored in the section of the book that this came from. So creating each of those index cards is really just step one in the process, because I do want to review them over time, and I'm choosing to do that review and that studying right before I go to sleep each night. I've heard that that's a good time to learn a new skill or work on a new language, because you're getting that helpful exposure right before your brain's about to do a bunch of processing and storing of things. And my hope too is that over time that might even trigger me to start dreaming in Spanish from time to time, something that really only happened when I was pretty far into my year in Ecuador. Speaking of that year in Ecuador, there's another another source of Spanish language that I've been exploring. I happen to still have the first ever iPod that I owned, one that I got right before going on that trip, that year of studying abroad. And while I was over there, I collected a bunch of music. And that's been fun to listen to, not only because that's a cool way to test your comprehension skills, but also because I've got some specific memories connected to the songs that I'm listening to. So I feel like that experience kind of just takes me back to that place where I first really learned Spanish. And one final piece to my overall study plan here falls not on the consumption of Spanish, but on the creation of it. I'm starting to do a bit of journaling each day in Spanish just to turn that muscle on again, because that is a very different skill compared to just listening to and understanding Spanish. There's a lot more pausing and my brain searching for the word that I'm looking for. And to not be too overwhelmed by that task, I'm shooting for just a paragraph a day where I describe something that happened yesterday or earlier today. So this here is my overall plan for getting ready for that 10-day trip. I'm dedicating about 30 minutes to an hour each day to this particular learning project here. And so far, at least, I'm feeling really good about how it's going. And I think it's going to help me get the most out of this travel experience. By the way, this trip that I'm looking forward to happens to be my honeymoon. So my wife Shelby will be along as well. So that will make it a very fun experience because she's been learning Spanish for a while. And even though my year in Ecuador is now over a decade in the past, I found that it's these types of relatively short trips to a place where you're immersed in the language that you're learning or that you've learned. Those short immersive trips are enough to kind of reboot that part of your brain, to reinforce all those language skills that you used to have, but maybe are kind of covered in cobwebs now. So that's another reason that I'm excited for this trip, to dust off those cobwebs. And if you are in the process of learning a new language, maybe in preparation for an upcoming trip of your own, feel free to steal any of the techniques that I just described. And if you'd like a fuller set of ideas about how you might use this particular skill of sketchnoting to help you develop your language skills, then check out my course, Learn a New Language with Sketchnotes. Throughout that course, I share a bunch of other activities for how you might apply this particular skill of merging hand-sketched images with handwritten words to the purpose of learning a foreign language. I think these two things of sketchnoting and language learning are really well suited for each other. So if that sounds interesting, do check it out via the link below. Good luck working on whatever language you're learning, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then.